Our next panel today is our brewer panel. We will have three guests on this panel today. Two are going to be virtual, so you get to look at Mark the whole time. But we're going to get this started so we can stay on track. Our first panelist is actually going to be virtual. Bart Watson, and he's the Chief Economist at the Brewers Association. Our next panel speaker will be Mark Yoakum. He is the Technical Director for North America Supply for Anheuser-Busch. And then our last panelist will also jump on as virtual, Mary Jane Saunders. She is the Vice President and General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for the Beer Institute. So Bart, we're going to get started with you. If you can hear me, you're up.
My name is Bart Watson. I'm the Chief Economist of the Brewers Association. I've been privileged to give this talk for several years in a row. I'm excited to continue, and I want to start by saying thanks. Thanks to everyone in the room who's a BA member. Thanks to everyone in the room who does stuff for this great industry. And thanks to HGA for helping me pivot to virtual. I know it's probably less exciting to hear me virtually than it would be on stage. But I can also assure you it's a lot less exciting for me to be stuck here with a toddler who can't go to daycare than it would be to be in Tampa drinking beers with all of you. So lots of thanks to go around. I'm going to run through, I think, about half an hour, and I'm going to try to run through 6 topics really quick, mostly related to craft beer demand, but happy to talk more generally about the beer market and beer trends in the Q&A section. So really quickly running through overall craft volumes, what's going on with draft and why you should care about that, at the brewery sales, package sales, the number of breweries, and then finally, what most of you are probably listening for, which is why I'm leaving it to the end, so you have to pay somewhat attention to me, what we saw in our hop usage survey this year and some other trends with hops. So first, overall craft. 2021 has certainly been a bounce back year for most craft brewers. As we'll see in a second, the channel shift that hit the beer industry, where people drank a lot less beer at bars and restaurants and more at grocery stores in 2020, really hurt craft brewers. But we've seen as those trends have reversed, that craft brewers have bounced back. There's lots of different ways to look at this, some of which are pints half full, some of which are pint half empty. But in general, we're going to see that percentage number swing back and the volume number gain. But I think it's going to put us in a place that's still below where we were in 2019. So there's still a recovery to go. As you can see on the graph, and by the way, these slides are welcome to make available to anybody, so don't feel like you have to squint too much or write things down. That yellow line on the graph that I presented here on the right, that's what craft would have looked like if it had 3% growth in 2020 and 2021. So not only are we still catching up to where we were in 2019, we're still digging out of a place that we could have been had the world not changed so dramatically. I'll underline again that we're seeing this recovery pretty broadly. I don't have full survey results from our annual production survey, but when I looked at this earlier in the week, we had over 1,000 responses in, of which 600 I was able to very easily match up year over year. And while it's certain that response bias exists, and by this I mean people always tell us the good numbers early and we have to drag the bad numbers out of them, that set of brewers who have responded so far was -8% in 2020, so pretty close to our average. And that group was reporting plus 16% so far, which was back above 2019 levels. And 60% of those respondents were back above where they were in 2019. So again, we're starting to see that bounce back really happen. Again, zooming in on that graph that I showed before, this still leaves craft at a point where 2021 is probably going to be below where it was in volume terms in 2019. But my projection is by 2022, craft brewers will be making more beer than they were pre-pandemic. So kind of as a sum of this section, the first section, total volumes are still behind 2019 and 2021, but they're recovering. There's still room for growth relative to that old trend. And while we probably won't catch up in 2022, we're getting back to where we were. The biggest reason for this shift overall has been the draft market. So starting with, why should you care about how much beer is sold at bars and restaurants? Here's a little thought exercise. Hop growers love IPA. So let's say IPA is 35 share of craft. That's roughly what it is in scan data. Craft is 30 share of the on-premise of bars and restaurants and 8 share of off-premise. and the total beer market is 200 million barrels. If you follow those assumptions, every 1 share point shift from draft to packaged beer is 154,000 barrels of IPA lost. So that's really what we saw, in craft last year. You could broaden this beyond IPA to all craft, and really why that kind of recovery of bars and restaurants matters so much for the hop industry. In general, we've seen the channel tide swing back toward on-premise. So this is not volume, but spending, total consumer spending. It's not just beer, it's everything. You can see how much that red line is food services and drinking places spending. You can see how much that cratered during the pandemic, but it's now recovered back to where it would have been inflation adjusted. And that other line is food and beverage stores, so kind of off-premise package spending, and that's recovered. Well, that's good. What we've seen generally is that draft has not recovered as strongly as the overall bar and restaurant market. So here's one indicator of draft sales, just keg production plus imports as a percentage of 2019, and those have pretty consistently through late 2021 still been minus 15 to minus 20 where they were. And so overall, we have a different on-premise. Here's 3 different indicators of that draft recovery, and you can see all of them, all those different colors, starting to level off at again that minus 15 to minus 20%. So we're going back and buying as much stuff from bars and restaurants, or at least from restaurants, as we were as a country before, but we're not buying as much draft beer. And unfortunately, I think that's going to continue for the near future, which limits some of the ability of craft and the overall beer industry to fully recover. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that I'm going to walk through. A spending pinch with rising prices. I don't think I have a slide on this, but Americans actually saved collectively money during the pandemic. We went out a little bit less, and we were able to spend that money on products that cost a little bit less. Buying a pint is more expensive in a bar than it is in a grocery store. The second reason is that we have a different composition of the on-premise, different stores, which is bad news for draft. And there's just other data sources that tell us that the recovery of actually getting back into bars and restaurants has plateaued, which suggests people have shifted their spending to things like delivery and to-go. On different stores, here's some Nielsen, IQ TD links data. I won't go too in depth here, but we just lost establishments in the U.S. And unfortunately, the ones that we lost were generally the ones where we drink the most draft beer. So fast food and fast casual did fine through this, but neighborhood bars and casual restaurants have had to close. We still have a population that by and large is getting more comfortable doing things, but there are still some percentage that are wary of going out to eat, physically being there. We don't have numbers from before the pandemic because nobody would have thought to ask, do you feel comfortable being in a restaurant pre-COVID? But my sense is these are much higher than they would have been. And then that final reason that I talked about, reservations and spending. Here we have 2 numbers. One is just a reservation index from open table data, and the other is credit card spending at accommodations and food service, so at restaurants and hotels. And you can see that one has recovered and the other hasn't. And the only way that we can really put these together is that people are spending differently, that they're spending more on things like delivery and to-go. And I think, again, that suggests long-term some caps on the draft beer recovery. So, prognosis here for draft and kind of limits on the overall craft recovery, with the note that there's big regional variations. In some places, restaurant sales are much stronger than others, is that the national recovery may have plateaued for the near term. And while I'm, confident in a longer-term full recovery, that's unlikely to happen in 2022. A positive note, switching to kind of another channel, is at the brewery, sales have bounced back much stronger. And it's tough to get really detailed data here, but I'm going to kind of look at a couple data sets. One is just the TTB data, where they break out what they call premise use. Unfortunately, this also lumps in quarterly filers, so it's not a perfect indicator. But that blue bar is this number from the TTB. And you can see that Q2 and Q3 2021 we're out now back at absolute levels above where they were in 2019 after taking dips in 2020. So real good sign there that breweries themselves have bounced back stronger than draft beer. Some of this is due to brewery growth, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But even if we look at it on a per brewery basis, this number is still back, stronger than it was before. And I should add that yellow line is my estimate of where the numbers will fall because the TTB always revises these numbers up. Another way we can look at this is from point of sale data directly at breweries. Here's an index of traffic and revenue at breweries, and you can again see that, that huge crater right going into the pandemic, but the recovery that breweries have had, throughout the rest of 2020 and then 2021, back to a place where traffic and revenue are now back to where they were pre-pandemic. Though, if you're looking at this closely, you'll notice that traffic has not recovered quite as well as revenue. Which means that something has changed. Here you can see this in average check size data, that breweries are making more per check than they did before. And my assumption there, after digging into this data more and more, is primarily this is a composition effect, that the people who really like breweries have gone back to breweries most, and so that they have returned, and they're more likely to be big spenders. And inflation adjusted, you can see there, some of this goes away with inflation. Interestingly, this is the opposite of bars and restaurants. At bars and restaurants, if you look at it, we've seen kind of people return at high numbers. Those ticket counts have gone up, but that they're spending less. In fact, if we control for inflation, people are spending on average 6% less in their restaurant visits. Some of that coming out of the draft beers we just saw. Whereas breweries are the opposite. They're going in less, but they're spending more when they're there. So brewery sales numbers stronger than draft. They're back to growth, and they're likely to grow again in 2022. So that's a good sign for the health of the long tail of breweries. And this, continues to look different in total and per brewery numbers as the market gets more competitive. All right, next up, packaged beer. And a lot of these trends hold true for overall beer as well. And again, I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A. When looking at package sales, one of the things that we always need to think about, and when you're looking at any data these days, you should be thinking about what's the comparison. You get very different takes if you're comparing the numbers that we see right now to their pre-COVID 2019 levels, or if you're comparing them to 2020. So here is by 4-week rolling period, just the overall sales levels for BA Craft in scan data. And you can see that if we're comparing it to 2020, it looks like sales have dropped. But if we're comparing it to 2019, you see that package sales are still very elevated relative to where they were. So, anything you're comparing these days in the market, you should be thinking about versus both 2019 and 2020. We can control for this by looking at share, and you can see that craft share has been remarkably constant within this time period. You can see that seasonal dip. Craft tends to sell, better in, say, the October, November, December period, and a little bit less in the summer when, American lager and light lager and now seltzer tend to have higher share. But this, I think there's going to be some challenges in this in 2022, and this is one certainly to put on, hop growers' radar as one of the cost inputs for brewers. What we've seen in the last, particularly 12 months, is that a lot of the input costs for brewers have been rising, while pricing hasn't been rising. And I think you're going to see this pressure show up the most in packaged beer, which is why I've included it in the average here. So this graph is just an average producer price index for 4 components that brewers use. Hops is not one of them. But barley, paperboard, general freight trucking, and aluminum cans. I haven't weighted them for the percentage of cost that brewers have. They're just averaged, equally. But you can see that the kind of sharp rise in all of these inputs for all brewers. This isn't just craft brewers in recent months. And then the CPI there, that's average pricing, hasn't really changed. CPI for craft has gone, up a little bit. This is from IRI data. But in general has still been in a 2 to 3% annual price increase window, which is I will say far below the cost increases that most brewers are seeing on the supply side. So I'll touch on this again when we get to the hop survey, but I think brewers are going to be looking for cost savings in the years to come, and this might be a place particularly they look at downstream products if they think those are more efficient and that saves them money. So what's next for package sales? I think 2022 will be similar to 2021 in volume, share, and size, that we've kind of settled into this period where sales aren't going to be as high as they were in the boom of the pandemic, but they're going to stay higher than 2019 until those draft sales come back. Dollar sales will likely be up on increased pricing, but inflation adjusted, that might be different. And price cost pressure is going to be everywhere. So I think it's a little bit too soon to know how that's really going to play out. Next up, number of breweries, another thing that I know a lot of hop growers and dealers care about. And I'm happy to announce that even with the turbulent market and the challenges of COVID, the number of breweries in the US is still going up. Now, it's going up not as quickly as it was before. So while we're seeing an increase in the number of breweries, that increase is decelerating. These are numbers from July, which I'm just a little more confident in that they've been fully counted and smooth. We're doing our annual count of license lists and things like that now. But you can see year over year, if we go back to 2018, we were getting plus 1,200 net breweries a year. Kind of crazy to say that out loud still. That decreased in 19 and 20 to about plus 800, and then took another dive in 2021 to about plus 400. But still, net increase year over year of over 400 new breweries in the United States. This decline is driven mostly by a decline in openings, or I should say this deceleration is driven mostly by a decline in openings. Some of this is going on before COVID, and some of this is probably COVID. Here I have a rolling 365-day look at our database, openings for the last 365 days. And you can see that yellow line is the trend of what was going on for the year before COVID and how it might have continued had COVID not occurred. That red line is obviously below that, suggesting that we saw even fewer breweries open than we would have expected, which makes a lot of sense. If you had the ability to delay or even cancel your opening after COVID, many people were going to take that opportunity. The good news is that closings haven't really risen. Maybe we're going to see that in 2022, and we'll see a delayed effect, and whether there's more government relief in the form of the RRF could affect this. But we haven't seen closings go up. In fact, closings on a rolling basis have been pretty static, which means in percentage terms, the percentage of breweries closing has actually gone down. These numbers only go through 2020 because we just find closings a little bit slower. So I want to present numbers that I'm confident are accurate. But everything we see in 2021 suggests 2021 is going to be similar. That closing number really isn't going to go up that much. And so, where we're seeing that brewery growth decelerate again is on the opening side, much more so than on the closing side. All right, but the last few minutes that I have available, I want to point out some stats on hop usage and go into some of the high points from our hop survey. First I want to talk about IPA, everyone in the hop business's favorite style. Or hopefully your favorite style. And this is the share of IPA within craft in scan data first. I've also put the absolute levels on there. You can see again, a year ago, that 2020 period is higher because of the higher package sales. But IPA continues to gain share, again, at kind of a decelerating rate, I would say. And so the last 52 weeks, IPA, or all of the sub-styles of IPA within craft are now up to 35 share of volume. I believe I'm using a BA craft definition. If you use a broader one, I think it's a little bit higher, but pretty similar. I also show here on this slide IPA by type. What we've really seen here is that a lot of the growth in the last couple of years has been in two styles that actually are slightly hoppier, typically. New England or hazy IPAs, and then Imperial IPAs have been the two fastest growing segment, whereas more classic American IPAs, which that's kind of a catch-all, but it's typically meant a little bit more dry West Coast style. That those have stagnated a little bit more and actually lost some share within IPA as Imperial and hazy IPA has grown. It's a little too small to see here, but another fast-growing percentage-wise part of the IPA segment is IPA mixed packs, which have grown pretty strongly. And that one on the right is only the top 5 styles to keep it a little bit less cluttered. All right, moving on to our hop survey. This is something we do every year. We've done since 2008. It's a survey, so results shown are estimates. I'm taking over from Chris here, and I'm going to try to change some stuff and talk about it a little bit differently and highlight where it's a survey and where there might be issues. But there's one big change in the survey, which you'll notice in the lack of all the slides that Chris used to do, which is we've shortened this survey pretty significantly with the goal of trying to get a much higher response rate. The survey was starting to drop to a pretty low response rate. I was getting worried, A, we were getting a biased view, and B, we weren't getting an accurate pounds per barrel number, which is one I know that the hop industry really cares about. So we shortened it, we made it much more condensed, and we really focused on getting more brewers to fill it out so we could have a more accurate look at that pounds per barrel number. All right, with that, what we saw is that in 2020, the hopping rate as measured by this survey was back up again to 1.59 pounds per barrel. This attempts to control for use of extracts and downstream products, which I'll talk about in a second. That's up from a revised number. I think last year I reported 1.4, it was either 1.46 or 1.49. After getting a bigger response rate this year and being able to go back and look at some of those responses, I think we can adjust that up a little bit, and that was an outlier based on kind of a lower sample last year. I've also presented this data slightly differently for those who are followers of this for a long time. Those years on the bottom are not now survey years, but craft production years, trying to measure that. I've also got in here a 2021 estimate. We asked brewers to fill out their estimate of what they were going to do in 2021. Given that the responses were in fall, I think this should be a fairly good estimate. And the estimate for those brewers who responded was that their hop usage was going to decline slightly in 2021. I think that's an efficiency. As we've seen, those IPA sales are still rising, so I think that's not they're making less hoppy beers, but that they might be seeing some efficiency and put together with the kind of longer period. I think what we're starting to see is after years of growth that we're settling into kind of more stability in hop usage for craft brewers. If we take out 2018, which I think has the distinct possibility of just being an outlier in terms of the sample that year. And to show this, I've put here's two standard errors away from our response this year based on our response rate and what we heard and kind of the variation of those responses. The true answer is going to have some variation year to year based on that sample. And what I think we've seen if you go back to 2016 through kind of 2021 is a little bit more stability in this rate, and it bounces up or down a little bit based on the composition of the sample we get. But really that kind of 1.55, 1.6, pounds per barrel, 1.5 maybe, depending on kind of how you read it, has settled in as more kind of a standard usage for craft brewers. And as we see increased IPA share, that's getting offset by increased efficiency from brewers as they make these IPAs. We can put this together, this kind of average usage with some of the production stats that I put up front. And it suggests that 2020 hop usage was down pretty sharply for craft brewers just because total production was down pretty sharply. But that in 2021, it should be back up, again, similar to the overall production, probably still a little bit below 2019, but well above 2020. And based on what I saw here and what I'm predicting for growth, I think hop usage by craft brewers should be back up in 2022 above where it was in 2019. So back to a point where total hop usage is growing. A couple other things to share. About 40% of craft brewers reported the use of some downstream products. So, something other than just pellets or whole cone. We converted the percentages they said they were using in raw pounds to, what they would be in total pounds of hops. And that graph is shown here. So pellets are still, by far the most used from craft brewers at 87%. But powders and other products, primarily, cryo powdered products, things like that, are up to almost 7% of pound usage that was reported in the survey. And the survey might be people who are just a little more into hops, so there's probably some bias there. Oils, 3.6% of total pound usage, and whole cone, 2.6%. And then one other question that we changed this year and we added, before we asked a lot about a lot of varieties and we created indexes and scores, and that should be simplified. We just said, if there were one hop that you would use more of, if you could get a stable supply, what would it be? And this is the percent of responses that mentioned who said something. We had some people who said, oh, I don't need anything, I got everything I want. But this is the percent of responses that said, if I had this hop, I would use more of it. So to me, this is a good signal that, if you are a grower or dealer of these hops, that there is untapped demand that would be there if there were more in the marketplace. Number one was Citra. So, clearly, as we see from the hop reports, the things that are going into the ground are the things that brewers continue to demand. Number two is a non-American hop, Galaxy. 3 and 4 were back to American hops, Mosaic and Strata. And then a lot of people didn't specify a hop, but just said, I want more of some product. And Cryo and Incognito were the two specific products that were mentioned the most. But I think there's also, clearly demand from some brewers just to get more of those products in particular. And then one last one that popped on the list was Nectarone. There were others, obviously, but then there were a lower percentage, and they're further down. If you're interested in a full list, email me after the fact. And with that, I will close my section and look forward to hearing the other panelists and talking to anyone again in Q&A.
Thanks, Bart. It's really nice to see some familiar faces out there. I've been afforded the privilege of getting to do this a couple times now. So for those that don't know me, my name's Mark. I work with AB and also get the privilege of working on the Hop Research Council. Have done that for the last few years, and it is so nice to see people. Holy crap. Like really nice to see people. So before I start the presentation, those that don't know me, I'll give you a quick chance to pretty much sum up my life. Real simple. My 5th birthday was awesome. A bunch of kids came and we had a blast, although it was cold. In 1983, I got my favorite Christmas gift ever, which was a St. Louis Cardinal baseball jacket. I was like thrilled, ran across the room because my brother got the same gift, but I didn't care that he got it. I really wanted that jacket. The U2 concert I went to in 1988, I know some people in this room might not even be that old to recognize that it was a concert in 1988 and it was by U2, but it was unbelievable. I had a blast. And I've had a ton of surgeries, all related pretty much to ice hockey. And all of them have gone really well. I've got like over 100 stitches and staples, but they've all gone really well. And lastly, I was early to the airport on Monday. Despite a really long security line, I had no problems getting through. Why do I tell you all that? Well, a bunch of people, I'm not in social media at all, really. And a bunch of people tell me I should be, including my kids. And for some reason, everything I just told you is important to somebody at some point in their lives. And I don't find any of it important at all to you guys, but now we're all caught up. So consider me in social media. If my kids ever ask, I'm in social media now. You all know the important stuff. And I did have a croissant for breakfast, and it was spectacular, in case anybody's curious. All right, sorry. I had to have a little fun. I mean, we're in the beer business. Why the hell not, right? So I do want to reiterate, thank you for the opportunity to get to talk. I think this is a huge privilege, and I come from a farm background, so this is a lot of fun for me to be in this audience. What I'm going to talk about today is really nothing you guys don't already know. But I'm going to hopefully drive home a couple of points. I don't see Park in the audience, but for the record, I'm going to make one point near the end twice. And I swear to God, I didn't add it after his talk. So just, you'll figure it out when we get there. What I want you to think about is beer is essential. We prove that because our beer business stayed open during the pandemic, and that wasn't the case everywhere. You can't make great beer without great hops. And last time I checked, beer's pretty important, therefore hops are pretty important. And I don't know if that's an and a but and a therefore. But what's important is you guys are important, like really important. You're a big deal, and you're a big deal to AB. So as I go through this, that's all you really need to remember. Everything else, if you want to kind of tune out, grab a beer, that's fine. I do have a few things to say, but this is what it's, for me, and kind of representing the company, that's what it's all about. So here's what I'm going to cover today. I'm going to talk very briefly. I'm going to try to get through this in less than 20 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about a review, because a couple years ago, I got to talk about kind of AB's philosophy, at least as of 2018, of what our outlook was. I'm going to talk a little bit, hot second, about kind of the review of what the last 2 years have done to all of us, but more importantly, kind of how AB's positioned themselves to try to get ready to go forward, because we know this thing's not going to hopefully last forever. And then what are those forward-looking aspects for us? And then obviously we'll have Q&A at the end after Mary Jane. Okay, you with me so far? All good? Okay, a couple years ago, I had fun in the talk because I got to talk about a bunch of rules. I listed 6 rules and had some fun, but these are kind of real rules that we use at AB about kind of our philosophy, and we covered them and some really good questions about where those rules come from. I then kind of pivoted into talking about the power of planning, because if you got all these rules, it doesn't mean anything if you don't follow them. So we talked about planning and how to execute. And then lastly, in 2018, we spent a lot of time talking about food safety, because food safety is just not a buzzword. At least in 18, it wasn't. And everyone's kind of moving through this now. And we're talking more and more about awesome topics like sustainability, and how we're going to all be around for 100 years. At least our industry will be, and the legacies we're leaving behind for generations. Okay. And the last piece, it was actually one of the rules. It was the first rule I covered, which don't fall in love with something you can't have. None of these rules that I covered in 18, or the planning aspects or the discipline behind them, or focusing on food safety or sustainability, none of that's changed. It was valid then. It's been valid for decades. It's going to be valid going forward. I only do that to kind of set the stage as, okay, last couple of years, we got dealt a hell of a blow. Everything's changed, right? We've gone around and looked at how we conduct business. The fact that we have to have discussions about what you do during isolation and how to keep your sanity, and the fact that we get to be with each other and how much we get to enjoy just that fact that we get to be around one another. It's a new reality for us. Zoom meetings, isolation. But most importantly for me, what it's really reiterated is how powerful our industry can be, because it unites people. You have the ability to have a Zoom happy hour. I never thought in a million years I'd be doing a happy hour with my family that lives in Europe, but you know what? It became fun. And so we're learning a new paradigm. So we need to be prepared for that new paradigm. And as we come out of it, I think it opens up opportunities for our industry to continue to grow and leverage. And I think we have to take advantage of that. What we've done as a company to try to prioritize over the last couple of years is look at, well, how has this affected our business and what have we had to pivot to? And again, not a huge shift for us, but a big focus on thinking globally, but acting locally. And it's kind of a buzzword. You hear that from time to time. We are a global brewer. We get to experience not only the pandemic, but the business and the dynamics and the supply chain issues that are out there at a global level. And so as a result, it doesn't divorce us from what happens at the local level. You know, those of us that coach sports teams or are active in our communities, just because we're a big company doesn't mean we're not part of that. And it helped us kind of ground back to that. And it forced us to look at how can we make a difference locally? And I'll touch on that in just a second. It also was an opportunity to reinvest in the business. If we were to go back to that talk in 2018, I talked about you go to the gym when you're healthy, not when you're sick. You double down on improving when you're in an opportunity to improve, not when you're unhealthy. And so we've done that and have made massive strides in the last 2 years to reinvest and turn inward as a company to try to position ourselves going forward. And I'll touch on that in a second as well. And our plan is to stick around for at least another 100 years. Now, where does this come from? Actually, in 2018, going into 2019, one of our global management trainees asked our then CEO, Brito, what would the world care if Anheuser-Busch ceased to be? And he didn't have a good answer. In fact, it bothered him so much, he made it a strategic initiative for his entire leadership group. And we studied it and we explored it. And we created this platform of trying to figure out how we're going to make sure that we're going to be sustainable as a company, as part of culture, for at least the next 100 years. And this has been, quite honestly, kind of a fun journey, because if you really think about the connected dots with ag and with breweries, you've got generations of farmers, you've got generations of consumers, you talk about brand loyalty, all of this fits. So it worked out really nicely. So how did that play out for us? Well, things being able to pivot and leverage some of our scale. What you see on the screen are sanitizer bottles. We began to mobilize creating sanitizer solutions, all for donation, not for sale, all across the globe. In the US, we donated well over a million units. And this was primarily to put in the hands of frontline workers, the people at hospitals, the people doing testing, the people doing emergency care, but then also making that available, yes, to our employees, but to communities. We began to reinvest, supporting local teams through water initiatives. We've donated tens of millions of cans of water for relief efforts, not just in the US. This was a benchmarking effort. One of the advantages of being global, that other zones, other parts of our company have been able to take advantage of what we've done since the 80s in the US and then leverage this globally. So the picture on the left is actually from Belgium, and making sure that we can support that local community. continuing to invest. We made a commitment, made a public announcement that we were going to invest $1 billion in capital over a 2-year period back into our U.S. operations. And that was not just the growth of expansion. And a lot of people, you know, I'm liable to get asked questions about seltzers. Yes, some of this was to capture seltzer volume, but it was also to double down on some of the expansion of our smaller brands that use a lot of hops that we've upsized into our larger breweries. This is a commitment to our jobs. This is a commitment to the industry. This is a commitment to reallocate assets, quite honestly, in a window where we're still trying to pay down debt. But we made a commitment that this is how you grow. You have to go to the gym when you're healthy, not when you're sick. And it's also about not taking anything for granted. You know, we learned lessons. This wasn't fun, right? We operate businesses in Mexico. We operate businesses in zones where beer wasn't deemed essential. And obviously that had an impact. Beer, fortunately for us in the US, is essential. And there's a lot of lobbying efforts and a lot of people in this room involved with that type of work. And that work needs to continue, especially in the hop business. The lobbying efforts and all that is super critical. And so these were things that became priorities for us because at the end of the day, beer is essential. It's what we're going to do going forward. So what are our objectives now? That's kind of the look back and how we pivoted in the last 2 years. Well, some things really don't change. If you're gonna make good beer, you gotta have quality ingredients. And that's really why we're all here. We've talked about pest and disease resistance, drought resistance, new varieties, all of those things. That's all about the quality of our industry that we share. And that's not really gonna change. That's still a fundamental priority and still one of our rules. We're going to look for synergies. We've heard a lot about sustainability and resilience. All this works, and we've doubled down. In fact, Maggie put up on the slide of some of the work that we did back in 2018, and that continues to evolve. When we put out that initiative for our 2025 plan in 2018, it's changed every year because as we close gaps quicker than we think, we open them back up to try to go further, and that we're well down that path. And I'll touch on that. And the last piece is a word that I use with my own team back in St. Louis. And I think it's not a buzzword. It's about partnerships. It's about figuring out how two groups help one another. We think we're pretty good at what we do, but that doesn't mean we have all of the best ideas. And sometimes other industries, other leadership, other groups, when you put those forces together, you then can elevate both groups. And that's really what a partnership's all about. And we've tried to leverage that. So let's touch on these items. Well, obviously the agricultural piece matters. We're going to continue to work towards understanding that we've got a great heritage and we are incredibly passionate about the quality of our products. So are you guys. It doesn't change. But sometimes you have to remind yourself why you do it. We use the phrase a lot of times, you can't fake giving a damn about what you do. You can't fake passion, you can't teach it, but you can live it. And so if you've got that passion towards your ingredients, your process, your labor, your family, your traditions, then you're going to focus your energy there and it's going to pay dividends because then you're going to have engagement. You're going to have people that are committed to be part of your team. We're going to support new varieties. We continue to be what we'd like to believe at the forefront of varietal development, both from a private and a public standpoint. These are vital to us going forward. We're constantly looking 10 years down the road. We know that no variety is sustainable forever. I haven't seen a lot of cluster in the Budweiser recipe in years, right? We've got to have new options. And so we continue to push down that path and we will. And it's not just limited to our global brands, but they chew up a lot of volume. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for the industry. We also are very committed to sharing a lot of that data. Since 2016, we've been sharing a lot of our harvest and data information for anybody that wants it, including our assessments of some of the experimentals. And we honestly view that as a portion of stewardship, that it's not something we need to guard. What someone chooses to do with that data is up to them. But to farmers, we know that feedback on how those plants, especially new ones, are doing are really important. How do they perform as a brewer? And we have to share that information. We have to close that loop. Otherwise, you guys don't get the feedback. And then lastly, supporting U.S. cultivars. If I just look at my U.S. operation in North America, really, over 70% of the hops that we use in North America are North American hops. So that's a strength position and a continued commitment to where our core is. And we don't see that changing. And that's an important piece for all of you, I think, to take away. I talked a little bit about the sustainability piece and moving forward. This is kind of, if you were to go out on our public site, you're going to see similar slides to this. This is pretty updated. And this talks about the 4 arenas that we made a commitment to back in 2018. And we keep tweaking these. The water stewardship is the piece that Maggie had put up on the slide, but it's certainly not limited to just water. Renewable and carbon footprints, making sure that renewable energy is out there. Almost 3 years ago now, we started putting on all the Budweiser labels because 100% of the energy used to make a bottle of Budweiser or any of our Budweiser volume is considered 100% renewable. And we take these things serious. Angie Slaughter, the person who runs this program for us for North America, does a fantastic job. And I think we don't, as an industry, do as good a job as possible of marketing this. This isn't an A/B claim. I think we can continue to push this envelope because, as you heard from Park, a lot of consumers are making these types of decisions. They're choosing products based on people that have this type of messaging. And we're recognizing that too. We have to figure out how to crack that code. Working on smart agriculture, that's making sure that we're sharing the information and the best practices. And in this case, it doesn't need to just be in hops. There may be practices from our rice industry or our barley industry, or even our global barley research that we can share. That's why I take being part of the HRC so serious, is because there's an opportunity for all of us to gain an insight on where we're going to go and how we're going to be sustainable, that 100-year outlook. And then lastly, circular packaging. Obviously, a lot of our product is packaged, and we've got to make sure that that is renewable as well, that that's not all ending up in landfill, and that we are truly pushing the envelopes. And that comes into play, especially globally, when we have a lot more returnable packaging and trying to get out of a lot of plastic and microplastic dynamics. This is what I'm talking about with partnerships. And what you see on the screen here is just a small example of different groups that we are actively partnered with to try to figure out how to get better. And it's not just about us, it's about them, it's about the partnership. And it kind of follows similar disciplines of agriculture, of water sustainability, of energy, of carbon footprint, of circular packaging. So all of this is active for us, and we take it very serious. And this is a commitment to us, but it also selfishly is about making sure that we're going to be around for 100 years, because these aren't buzzwords. This is how we have to operate. And so looking forward, as I start to sum up, you know, at the end of the day, we're really no different than anybody else. We may be a little bigger, but we all are going to face headwinds. And you face those headwinds and you face that adversity and you lean into your character, you lean into your integrity and your resolve. And through that, you're going to survive. It's that, heard it in the previous panel, it's that never give up attitude. Those opportunities, instead of giving you a chance to fail, it's really about a chance to succeed. I'll challenge anybody to give me a life example, and I'll give you a baseball analogy. And baseball is a game of failure, right? 30% of the time, if you get a hit, you're probably going to the All-Star game and you might end up in the Hall of Fame. But it's not about the 70% failure. You talk about the 30% success. It's an opportunity to get hit. It's an opportunity to succeed. And I think that's how we have to view all the things that have been dealt to us, supply chain shortages and pandemic and the like, as an opportunity to adapt and get stronger moving forward. And here's the buzzword, Park said it. You got to leave it better than you found it. This is something we've adopted with my team back in St. Louis about a year or so ago. It's slightly different phrasing of my group's in the business of making things better. But that's really the same thing, is are you going to leave it better than you found it? So this is actually a page right out of our website. And it captures it better than I can, better than my words, is we're building a company to last, brewing beer and building brands that will continue to bring people together for the next 100 years and beyond. With centuries of brewing history, we've seen countless new friendships, connections, and experiences built on a shared love of beer. Cheers. This is really for us what it's about right now. The last piece I'll leave you with on final thoughts is, from our position, I think we've been dealt some blows, but the industry is still very, very strong. And it's time to double down. It's time to go to the gym. It's time to continue to invest in strengthening where we're at, those challenges are coming. There's going to be new ones on the horizon, but so what? We'll meet or exceed those challenges. That's why we're all here. There are all kinds of distractions that are going to keep coming, whether it's another pandemic, whether it's more shortages, whether it's, who knows, we know we're staring down the barrel of a not so great barley crop for this year. Those challenges, those distractions are going to keep coming. But when you cut those corners and start sacrificing your standards, use this phrase, coaching sports for years, integrity and character are what you do when no one's watching, okay? Put a spotlight on what you're doing with your farms, with your groups, getting the feedback from them, and listening to people, listening to what they're telling you, listening to your consumers, listening to the market, listening to each other. It's basic stuff, but you know what? It really works. And there's a high likelihood you're going to keep getting disrupted. So what? Stay consistent. Know that you guys are essential and focus on leaving it better than you found it. So with that, I think that's the last one. I will turn it over to Mary Jane.
Welcome to my dining room. I wish I was with you in person, but circumstances prevent me from traveling right now. And I recognize that I'm the last speaker of the day. I'm the person who stands between you and a cold beer. So I'm going to try to keep my remarks brief. I will begin, as Bart did, with a thank you for inviting me. This is the first time I've had the privilege of speaking to this group. And I felt that since Mark introduced himself by saying a little bit about himself, I want you to know that my life is far less exciting than Mark's. I drink my coffee black. I had a banana for breakfast, and I scrupulously avoid the gym. But of course, I've spent most of my time in my house for the last year, almost a year and a half at this point. My job at the Beer Institute is to handle legal and public policy matters. And if you ask me to describe my job, it is to save the world for beer through law and public policy. Today, what I want to do is to bring you up to date on the Beer Institute's current legal and regulatory agenda, talking to you briefly about three topics that we're following this year: equalization, aluminum, and the executive order on competition. I'm going to spend most of my time on equalization, and again, I promise to keep this as short and painless as possible so that you can have the opportunity to drink that beer very soon. The equalization is an interesting topic for all of us because many people think it just means taxes and lowering excise taxes on beer, but in fact, it means a lot more than that. In the world of alcohol, equalization means equal access to retail outlets, to customers, equal regulatory systems, and also to the greatest extent possible, and this is for the hard liquor industry, they're looking for equalization in taxation. Today's focus for hard liquor are ready-to-drink cocktails. And we are focusing a lot of BI attention this year, as we did last year, on trying to defeat efforts by the hard liquor industry to bring about equalization for ready-to-drink cocktails. Last year, we spent a considerable amount of time fighting back efforts by the hard liquor industry to achieve equalization of RTDs in New Jersey. This year, we're looking at a number of different states and the federal level where the distilled spirits industry is looking for equalization for its products. Now, the states that I want to talk about today, only two, Arizona and Washington State, are taking slightly different approaches in their efforts to bring about equalization for RTDs. In Arizona, There's a bill that would create a category of ready-to-drink spirits products that are put in their own small universe, and those would be products under 12% ABV. And those products would be allowed to be sold in beer and wine stores, which would be a major departure for the sale of distilled spirits products in Arizona. There would also, though, be a reduction in the excise tax rate for these products under 12% ABV. Basically, a 68% cut in the excise tax rate. This is what the liquor industry wants to achieve in Arizona, to take the excise tax rates for ready-to-drink cocktails down to 84 cents a gallon, which is the wine rate, instead of the traditional hard spirits rate, which is $3 per gallon. So a huge drop, but not as much of a drop as they're trying to achieve in Washington state. Now, in Washington state, there is a proposal that has been introduced in both the House and the Senate to create a separate category of low-proof spirits products. And that would include RTDs with an ABV under 7%. The same bill would reduce the excise tax rates on these products from the current spirits rate of $13.11 a gallon down to $1.19 a gallon. Now, that's higher than the wine rate, which is 87 cents a gallon, and higher than the beer rate, which is 26 cents a gallon. But it's still almost a 90% drop from the existing excise tax rate in Washington for distilled spirits products, which is, again, 13.11 cents. We're actively opposing this legislation together with brewers in Washington and distributors in the state and other alcohol interests. But we've got a very short trigger time to work on this. Washington, as many of you know, is a 60-day legislative session. The session started on January the 10th. And we know the legislature has a lot of priorities to deal with this legislative year, but we're not going to be complacent. We're going to do everything we can to make them aware that this is a bad legislative proposal, bad for the state of Washington. First, it's really a big liquor interest, and it does no good for small brewers in the state of Washington. It does no good for beer generally, but small brewers in particular. We're really concerned that if the hard liquor industry gets this reduction in excise taxes in Washington, that beer, and particularly craft beer, is going to lose shelf space in the state. We also know that a change in the tax rate is going to change the pricing of these products at market. Right now, a 4-pack RTD in Washington state is running about just under $16 a 4-pack. A 6-pack of craft beer is running about $11 a 6-pack. If this change, if there is a 90% reduction in the excise tax, though, we'd expect that the price of that 4-pack of RTDs would go somewhere in the $11 to $11.50 range, which would be a significant hit to beer and craft beer in particular. We're opposing it. We're working every angle we can to defeat this legislation, but at the same time, we're not losing sight of the broader effort by the distilled spirits industry to bring around equalization at the federal level. Discus has already announced that reduced tax rates for RTDs is a priority for them on a federal level this year, and we're working to respond to that. Now, their argument is that RTDs should be taxed at the same rate or close to the same rate as beer because all alcohol is the same and the products that they are offering have a lower ABV, similar to the ABV of beer. That argument is really simple, but it's highly misleading. First, Excise taxes have never been set based on ABV, not on the federal level. They've always been set by alcohol type. And this goes all the way back to colonial times and the first excise tax that was applied to whiskey. The rate for spirits, wine, and beer have always been different, with wine always in the middle between distilled spirits and beer having the lowest rate consistently. Now, that policy is what the distilled spirits industry is trying to turn on its head. And we think it is bad public policy. And we also think it is misleading to argue that all alcohol is the same in this context. Because what many people don't realize is that the distilled spirits industry has substantial tax advantages in other areas that make the effective tax rate on distilled spirits on the federal level much, much lower. For example, a lot of their products are made with distilled wine. They do not pay a distilled tax rate across the board for those products. They pay a lower rate for the distilled wine portion. They also have tax advantages, which admittedly beer also has, for products that they import and export. In other words, if you import vodka and export vodka, you're not paying any excise taxes on what you export, but because you've exported the vodka, you can claim a refund of all the excise taxes you've paid on the imported vodka. And we think many of the products, many of these RTD products are very likely to be made with imported vodka on which no excise tax was actually made. And finally, there are rum RTDs in the marketplace. And what a lot of people don't realize is that rum from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands has an advantage because all the excise taxes that are paid for sales of those products into the mainland United States are returned to the Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and that those two territories give the rum industry a substantial subsidy to market their products. So you've got RTDs made with products that already have lower effective excise tax rates and subsidies for marketing. We don't think there's any reason to give them another break. Also, one more thing, excise tax rates were just made permanent. Lower excise tax rates were just made permanent with the Craft Beverage Modernization Act. We don't think Congress is going to be too hospitable to the idea of additional lowered tax rates for distilled spirits, but again, we're not being complacent. I promised you two more topics, aluminum and the executive order on competition. I'm going to do those again very quickly. On aluminum, this has been a focus for the Beer Institute for too many years now. We've been concerned about tariffs. We've been concerned about the pricing models that are used for can sheet used to make cans and how it is not completely transparent. We're trying and continuing in our effort to get the Biden administration to lift tariffs on all aluminum, but particularly can sheet. And one of the challenges we faced is explaining to them, making them realize that as long as a single country is subject to Section 232 tariffs, we pay a tariff price on all the can sheet and all the cans. We need the administration to lift the Section 232 tariffs completely, and we have asked them to do so. I'm not optimistic that they're going to reach a trade deal with China anytime soon, and that's an essential part of getting rid of the Section 232 tariffs completely. But we are passing along the message that they're hurting the beverage industry to a significant extent. We've calculated that since the tariffs went into effect in March of 2018, the beverage industry has paid $1 billion in add-on fees that are attributable to tariffs, when in fact, the metal that's being purchased isn't actually subject to tariff. So much so that only 100 million of that $1 billion number actually went to the US Treasury. This is an effort that we're working to convince the Federal Trade Commission to look at, the Department of Justice to look at, and we're asking the Commerce Department to increase opportunities for brewers to achieve exclusions from tariffs directly from the federal government. My final topic, and again, I'm going to touch on this very briefly, is the executive order on competition. Last June, the Biden administration announced that it was going to do a whole of government review of competition issues, but they announced that there were certain industries that they wanted different agencies to focus on. For Treasury, the White House said that there should be a review of competition issues in the alcohol industry, not just beer, but beer, wine, and distilled spirits. Not just the producer tier, but all three tiers, producer, distributor, and retailer. The report that the Department of Treasury was supposed to write on the subject was sent over to the White House last November. That report was part one of a two-part project given to the Department of Treasury. Part two is to look at regulations that they might change or improve to increase competition. They solicited comments before they wrote their report. The Beer Institute, the BA, the NBWA, all the alcohol interests filed comments. BI's comments focused on some of the points that Bart has made about the continuing growth of the brewing sector. Even during COVID, the number of new breweries that opened or new permits requested. And we also spent a considerable amount of time talking about proposed regulations that the administration should consider revising or eliminating or improving in some manner to increase competition. The report is supposed to be issued by the White House perhaps as early as next week. I can't predict what's going to be in it. All I can say is that we will be reading it closely, and we'll reading it particularly to see whether what they capture in the report is a true reflection of the industry, the marketplace, and how businesses are actually operating. We will respond to it as we think is appropriate, and we will hopefully find ourselves in good shape with regulators and with Congress as a result of that report. Now, I'm going to end by giving a thank you that I actually should have given at the beginning and then open it up to questions. And my thank you is to the entire hops industry for helping us last year when we were having a little difficulty with the World Health Organization. We have been trying to work with the World Health Organization in their efforts to reduce the harmful effects of alcohol worldwide. And one of the challenges we put to them was enhancing the availability and appeal of low and no alcohol products as a way of moving people away from high alcohol products to low alcohol products and reduce the overall harm from alcohol consumption worldwide. I'm pleased to say that with your help, the report that came out that is going to direct the World Health Organization's efforts in this regard did include a recommendation for low and no alcohol products to be considered as part of the solution, not the problem. And I thank you for joining us and sending a letter off that clearly had an impact on the World Health Organization report writers. With that, I have gone a little bit over the time I said I was going to spend. I apologize, but I think we're all three open for questions.
Yes, Mary Jane, thank you. So yes, at this time we have a couple minutes left. We can do Q&A for any of the panelists if anyone has one. You guys can use the mic in the middle of the room as well. No questions? Everyone's ready to party? All right, well, thank you to all of our panelists today for being on this board. We appreciate you guys' time and insight in our industry, so thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And then up next, oh, good.
So there's a question up there.
Oh, there's a question? All right. No? Faked us out. Okay.
Oh.
All right, Diane, thank you.
Yeah, this question is for Mary Jane, and it's a little point of clarification, just I was not sure. When you're talking about the aluminum tariff, and this is, I just don't know, this is not my forte, does that also count recycled aluminum? Because there's this whole thing with steel that even recycled steel that's recycled in the US still gets charged a tariff because of how it's processed. Just was curious on that.
The answer is we are paying tariff on recycled metal. 85% of the content of can sheet is recycled metal, and recycled metal is not subject actually to any tariff. But because of the way the pricing of aluminum is structured, we actually end up paying a tariff price for on 100% of the cost of the can sheet.
Anything else out there? All good? Okay, well, thank you guys again for being on the panel today. We appreciate all your time.
Thank you. And cheers.